Hi everyone, Sweaty Bandano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review for the new Sufjan Stevens, BRYCE, DESSNER, NICO, MUHLY, and James McAllister album, Planetarium. This is a new collaborative record from all the people I just named, an album that is so immense and large in scope that it's a little difficult to sum up. This thing is a 75-minute album about our solar system and its planets. Not only that, but the lyrical concepts of the tracks are derived from the mythology of the names attached to the planets: Venus, Uranus, Jupiter, so on and so forth. Sufjan then ties this to a series of personal experiences and passionate thoughts put poetically on sex, war, his father. And of course, given the names of the creators of this record, there is a wide array of musical styles on this thing, instrumental palettes. Singer-songwriter and multi-instrumentalist Sufjan Stevens has covered a multitude of musical bases over the years, and he continues to do so here. Given what I know of BRYCE's work in the National, I wasn't expecting too much from him on this album, to be completely honest, but his guitar work is actually so versatile. It pops up almost everywhere on this entire thing. You know, there aren't too many moments here where he isn't finding, some kind of pocket or some kind of place where he can provide a little bit of color, a little bit of texture, some extra melody or counterpoint. NICO MUHLY is the person who I was most excited to hear contributions from, and I was not disappointed. Given his background in classical composition, of course, you're going to hear orchestral horns and strings and a variety of other pieces of instrumentation on this thing to enhance the bass line of vocals, guitars, keyboards, drums. And drummer James McAllister, I'm sure, is bringing all of the acoustic percussion on this thing, but there's actually quite a bit of sequence beats, synthetic production on this album as well that sound kind of akin to that of what you might have heard on Sufjan Stevens' Age of Odds record. So to recap, the percussion on this thing, both electric and acoustic. Sufjan Stevens' vocals, which, usually are delivered in that really kind of chilly, hushed fashion, but occasionally fed through a vocoder or hit with a dash of auto-tune. NICO MUHLY's orchestral contributions to the record, all the guitar work on this thing, and the intertwining planetary and mythological lyrical concepts flowing throughout this thing. It's 75 minutes, 17 tracks, and it is the definition of ambitious, or at least the definition of indulgent. And I'm not gonna lie, this album was not easy to digest. Definitely one of the more difficult listens in any of these artists' discographies. Not only because compositionally and structurally these songs hit the listener with so much that after multiple listens, it's kind of hard to gain any sense of familiarity with a lot of what's going on. But the flow of the album is kind of confounding too. There doesn't really seem to be any practical reason to why the songs are ordered in the way that they are, at least in regards to the planetary concept of the record. Maybe I'm 100% wrong on this, but I think the track list is ordered purely for aesthetic purposes, but that's also kind of confusing because I don't think it runs all that fluidly. There are various short interludes throughout the album that feel almost unnecessary and insignificant, shouldered in between these like Hulk-sized, massive musical pieces. With Black Energy and Sun, we see two of the album's most prominent ambient-ish, droney tracks put shoulder to shoulder, and I don't know, I'm just not really sure why. I guess I could kind of come to somewhat of a guess based just on the titles alone, but listening to one track after the other, I don't really hear kind of a night and day difference between the tone of the two songs. If you weren't paying attention, you would probably assume that they were just an extension of each other. You could most likely arrange the songs on this track list into a variety of different orders, and you would get roughly the same Lost in the Woods experience. While the song Neptune is pretty beautiful and I think guides listeners very gently into the planetary concept of the record, once Jupiter comes in, that track really smashes any hope of this album being manageable, especially with there being a sudden 30-second interlude right after. And honestly, I like the song Jupiter a lot. I love the heavy, hard, industrial kind of flavored pieces of percussion that fly into the latter half of the song that are really aggressive, really exhilarating. There's a nice catchy refrain on this track too, and I think it's one of the more fluid compositions, really visceral, comes to a great climax. But the progression of the album overall is just sort of spotty, sprawling, and inconsistent. The tracks don't really reinforce each other all that well, at least not in the sense that the album as it progresses gets more powerful, wondrous. There are a couple exceptions. I like how the immense orchestral beauty of the song Pluto melts away into some bustling electronics that set the stage for the following track, Weeper Belt. But then why does the song Black Hole just hard transition into another drone at the start of Saturn? These two drones that sort of end and start the respective tracks don't really feel all that similar to me in tone. There are a handful of songs in the track list that create an incredible amount of momentum within themselves. Jupiter, Mars, Uranus, Pluto. I think the most glaring exception to this is maybe the song Earth, which is the longest track on the entire record, and I think embodies the somewhat disjointed feel of the entire album as a single piece. And since that's the case, since Planetarium is not a very holistic listen, the tracks individually are kind of left to fend for themselves, which is not very good for an album so long and with such a bold and in-your-face concept to it. The songs on this record should obviously be, without question, greater than the sum of their parts. Instead, I felt like I was left to just judge each song individually because they didn't build off of each other all that well, and that's not really all that great because some of the songs in the track listing here don't really make all that much sense as standalone pieces. The song's overuse of autotune and flickering electronics is really grating. I'm actually kind of sick of it by the time the song is over. That being said, I do like the inclusion of vocoder at the moments it is used on the album. It actually kind of takes me out of the mindset that I'm listening to another Sufjan album. Really, I enjoy kind of the cold, robotic tone of those vocals. To me, that's something I would love to hear on an album that's about the solar system. You know, there are a lot of very big, ambitious, beautiful, and wonderful ideas on this album. They're just not really all that organized all that well as a collective record. I think if a lot of these songs were being composed with the rest of the tracks in mind, they would have flowed into each other a little bit better. Some tracks would have been pared down just a little bit in order to get people's mouths watering and hold attention spans for the next track. I feel like I'm listening to some very good and some very large ideas just cobbled together to create this giant Frankenstein monster that's moaning and wobbling around and not sure why he exists or where he's going or what he's doing, which is actually not the vibe I want to get at all from an album with this concept, because when you look at the way our solar system works, especially in terms of orbit and a variety of other things, there's actually quite a bit of flow and harmony to the system. I don't get that on this album. I don't get that vibe on this record. For me, this was a really tiring album. There were a lot of spots that I liked, but overall, I did not feel good coming away from this record at all. Hardcore fans will most likely love the shit out of this thing and forgive its lack of a coherent direction. Most likely, people are going to love this thing because it sounds big and its intentions aren't all that clear, so as a result, it must be deep. But for me, all I feel like I'm hearing is just like a lot of winding compositions that don't quite know when to stop. Case in point, the final track, Mercury, whose trailing guitar interlude that closes the track out does nothing for the second half of the song and nothing for the final moments of this album. It's just like this extended thing that's like, okay, all right, wrap it up. You know, I'm kind of indifferent toward it. There are things, again, that I really like. Some of the orchestral instrumentation, some of Sufjan's songwriting. I like a lot of the lyrics that he includes on some of these planets when he's talking about the god mythology and sort of how that relates to his feelings on the things that they represent. I like the idea of the concept. I like some of the guitar work. I actually like some of the electronic percussion on this record more than I did on The Age of Odds, where, you know, it was a little bit of a turnoff for me. I think the inclusion here is a little bit more refined and noisy and crazy. But overall, as an album, especially an album that's supposed to have such a clear concept to it, it just feels really flabby and indecisive and long-winded, and I'm just sort of indifferent toward it. I'm feeling a light to decent 5 on this thing. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe. And please don't cry. Just leave an angry comment in the comments if you're angry. Videos next to my head that you should check out. Subscribe to the channel. Official website too. Make sure you stay hydrated if it's hot out. And I'll catch you in the next video forever.